The Dyatlov Pass in the northern Urals is one of the most mysterious places in Russia, where an inexplicable tragedy occurred in 1959, claiming the lives of 9 tourists. However, few people know that strange and frightening events continued to occur in this area for many years afterwards. Today, we will tell you 3 real and still unexplained stories of disappearances and mysterious deaths of people who went to the Dyatlov Pass for the most ordinary reasons. Some wanted to take photos, some were on a professional assignment, and some were studying the local nature. Each of them encountered something inexplicable, and each of these cases still has no rational explanation. What is really happening in the Dyatlov Pass area? In January 1993, a group of 3 friends, 28-year-old Pavel Melahov, 26-year-old Anastasia Nastya Guseva, and 31-year-old Anton Sokolov, set off for the Dyatlov Pass to combine an exciting outing with night photography of rare lunar landscapes. All 3 were winter hiking enthusiasts, lived in Yekaterinburg, and knew about the tragic history associated with this place, but they were not seeking mysticism. They simply wanted to capture the beauty of the snow-covered mountains of the northern Urals in the moonlight on film, as well as test their strength in harsh conditions. Each of them already had experience hiking in the winter months, and knew how to pitch a tent and build a fire in sub-zero temperatures. Pavel, the informal leader of the group, worked as a physics teacher, and had been interested in astronomy since childhood. He had often noted how high the moon rose in this area in winter, and believed that, under certain weather conditions, it would be possible to take magnificent photographs. Nastya Guseva was in her final year of studying philology, but she was very interested in folklore and legends. She loved collecting tales about different places in the Urals, although she herself did not believe in anything mystical. Anton Sokolov, an electrical engineer by profession, could repair even the most complex radio stations and cell phones as far as they could be used at the time, but mainly supported his friends on their trips by being an almost professional skier. The very idea of reaching the Dyatlov Pass in January seemed a little eccentric, but the guys had everything planned out. They calculated a convenient spot on the slope to spend the night with their cameras, hoping to capture the moonlit landscapes and clouds. They arrived in the Dyatlov Pass area on January 22nd, leaving their car in one of the villages below and agreeing to return in about 5 days. The area is widely known for the tragic events of 1959, but it also attracts extreme sports enthusiasts with its winter routes. During this period, the weather was harsh, but not extremely cold, around -15 at night. According to the latest diary entries, the group successfully completed the first part of the journey and set up camp not too high up to avoid stormy winds. They spent about 3 days adapting and making radial trips. According to Nastya's notes, the weather is tolerable, the wind is minimal, the night sky is strikingly clear, and the moon is really bright. Their last night on the route arrived as planned. On January 25th, they wanted to climb a little closer to the pass, set up their tent, and then, on the night of the 26th, take a whole series of pictures in the moonlight. Pavel's diary mentions, "I'm surprised at how unusually large the moon is today, and how it emits a special light. Perhaps it is an optical effect from ice crystals in the air." It is also noted that before nightfall, they noticed strange behavior among the forest animals. "We saw wolverine tracks again, but at some point it was as if all living things had fallen silent." Nastya's last words in her notes, "I have a feeling that something is interfering with us. It has become unusually quiet, as if the forest is holding its breath." The next morning, on January 26th, when the group did not make contact, although it was planned that they might not do so due to the lack of radio communication, no one was alarmed yet. But by January 28th, when they did not appear below, Anton's friends and parents began to worry. People familiar with the area set off on snowmobiles to the presumed location of the camp. Around noon, they found a tent standing in a relatively sheltered spot on a slope leading to the pass. Small fir trees and bushes shielded it from the wind, so there were no snowdrifts. However, the young people themselves were not inside. When the rescuers, at that time, they were volunteers and a couple of members of the Yegert squad, looked inside, everything was in order. Sleeping bags, warm clothes, food supplies, and cameras, except for the film. It seemed that no one was in a hurry to leave the camp. Why would they leave their warm clothes in the cold? There were no signs of a struggle or an emergency escape. The tent zipper was neatly closed, and nothing was scattered around. The snow prints around the tent were partially covered, but there was nothing to indicate where the people had gone. It occurred to me that they had gone out for a night photo shoot. Maybe something had happened on the way. During the day, the search team began to expand the radius, trying to find any clues. About a mile west of the camp, rescuers unexpectedly stumbled upon a group of ski poles and skis, sticking vertically out of the snow, as if someone had deliberately stuck them there. Again, there were no traces around, no clothes lying around, no backpacks, just these skis and poles. The dogs that were with the searchers lost the scent after a few feet. Perhaps it had been blown away by the wind, although the weather was still calm that day. Everything looked so illogical that the first people who saw the scene couldn't explain it. 3 people couldn't have left the camp silently at the same time, leaving their warm clothes behind and not taking their skis. But the fact remains, the poles and skis are sticking out of the snow a mile away, and they themselves have disappeared without a trace. A search of the nearby clearing also yielded no traces of further steps. The tracks suddenly disappeared in the middle of the flat snow, as the searchers later reported. There were no hidden ravines, cliffs, or lakes to fall into. Subsequently, official rescue teams called in by the authorities spent a week searching every inch of the surrounding area. Weather conditions partially complicated the task. There was light snowfall and wind, but no catastrophic storms. Technically speaking, it is extremely difficult to lose 3 people in such an area without leaving any trace. But that is exactly what happened. The notes in the tent indicated that on the evening of January 25th, they recorded a delightful moon and wrote about the deep silence in the forest. The story quickly took on the air of a legend. Many people have heard about the disappearance of 3 students on the Dyatlov Pass in 1959, and although this is a different place, the name Dyatlov Pass has always had a shadowy reputation. Here, too, there is no explanation as to why people suddenly disappeared in clear weather. There are no signs of scattering or panic. Their belongings were neatly arranged, warm clothes were present, and the tourists themselves left without their skis, leaving them stuck in the snow. This seems illogical, as walking in deep snow without skis is difficult and cold. The investigation determined that there were no conflicts within the group. They were friends. Were there any strangers in the area? It seems not. Any wild animal attacks? No traces, blood, or clothing fragments were found. In the end, no one was found, and the official report stated, "Missing, cause unknown." The 1993 story of the disappearance of 3 students near the Dyatlov Pass, which may seem like a crazy fantasy, was nevertheless documented by the police. Winter, a quiet forest, the moon, a mysterious silence, and the next morning, an empty tent and no one knows where the guys went. Skis and poles stick out neatly a mile away, and the tracks suddenly disappear as if they had been erased. Relatives search tearfully for answers, but none of the theories, accident, predator, kidnapping, were confirmed by anything real. People who were into the mystical picked up on this episode as proof that the area could hide something unexplainable, inheriting the negative reputation of the Dyatlov Pass incident in the culture of disappearances. Many years passed, and no traces of the 3 young night photographers were ever found. In the autumn days of 1996, the northern Urals were already covered with the first frosts, and everyone knew that the imminent onset of winter would make the local mountains and passes virtually inaccessible to ordinary tourists. Few people dared to travel to those parts at that time, but the aviation service continued to carry out occasional flights. It was necessary to monitor weather conditions, check for icing, and be on call in case of emergencies in remote areas. One of these pilots, working under contract with the regional emergency services, was 39-year-old Valery Shuvalov. An experienced pilot, he had a good track record of flying in mountainous areas. Born into a military family, he dreamed of flying from childhood, graduated from flight school, and flew Mi-2 and Mi-8 helicopters for many years. In recent years, he had participated in various search and rescue operations and was very familiar with the terrain of the Urals. In early October 1996, he was assigned to conduct a routine flight over the Dyatlov Pass area. Formally, he was supposed to check the condition of mountain trails, rock slides, and possible weather anomalies. The weather at the time was more or less stable, with moderate winds and no precipitation forecast. Shuvalov took off from the Ivdel airfield in the morning of October 3rd. He was alone on board, with only his fuel supply and a camera to photograph the icy slopes. There was no co-pilot or flight engineer, which was common practice on short patrol flights. The dispatcher, who remained in contact with Valery, noted that he was behaving normally. He asked clarifying questions about the weather conditions and was going to make a couple of turns over the pass before returning. At about 10:15, the pilot reported, "Approaching the Dyatlov Pass, slight crosswind, but controllability is normal." A few minutes later, Valery came on the radio and said he saw something strange on the ground, like a white spot or a glare I don't understand. The dispatcher tried to call him again, but there was no response. The weather at the pass remained stable that day, with no severe storms. It was immediately assumed that something unexpected had happened. Perhaps the helicopter had crashed or made an emergency landing. An emergency search and rescue operation was launched. Another aircraft was sent, but during the day, neither smoke nor debris could be found. The rescue team landed at the foot of the pass and tried to circle the pass and the surrounding area on all-terrain vehicles. They were unsuccessful. The next day, a larger group was brought in to comb the area within a radius of several miles, using Shuvalov's presumed flight plan as a guide. However, no visible traces of the crash were found. Everything looked quiet and empty. Days passed and the autumn cold grew stronger. People racked their brains. If he crashed, there should be debris, smoke, a fire. If he landed, he would surely have made contact. In the end, the entire operation took on enormous proportions. On the 6th or 7th day after the disappearance, volunteers and rescuers began to realize that in the foggy weather, it was starting to resemble a search for a needle in a haystack. Mountains and forests stretched for miles with many gorges and dense forests. But a month later, when hopes were fading, something happened that only further confused the situation. One of the pilots flying a reconnaissance mission for another task noticed a helicopter standing in a clearing near a small lake about 6 miles northwest of the pass. They had searched that area before, but not very thoroughly, as they believed that if the aircraft had landed there, the traces would have been obvious. Indeed, from the air, the helicopter appeared to be intact, with no damage to the blades and the landing gear still in place. There were no signs of an emergency landing. The ground was level, with no dents or traces of fuel on the grass. A rescue team was immediately dispatched to the site. Approaching the aircraft, they saw that the cabin was empty. The doors were closed but not locked. Everything inside looked peaceful. The instrument panel was off, except for the radio transmitter, which was still on, as if an attempt to make contact had been abandoned. Shuvalov's camera, a standard Zenit according to the description, was lying in the cockpit as if it had been carefully placed on the seat. There were no signs of a struggle or dents, and no documents or navigation maps were found. The pilot himself was missing without a trace. After a detailed examination of the helicopter, experts saw that there was still fuel left. What does this mean? It is unknown. Perhaps Valery deliberately landed here, but why? There were no injuries or damage to the helicopter. Not even the landing gear wheels were damaged. If he planned to leave the aircraft, why didn't he call anyone? And most importantly, why didn't he contact them by radio if it was on? There were no footprints or tracks on the ground around the helicopter, only sparse grass. Dogs searched the area in circles, trying to pick up the pilot's scent, but according to the dog handlers, the scent was old and quickly dissipated in the autumn chill, especially since a month had already passed. As it happened, the car was found intact, but the man himself had disappeared in a completely unknown direction. The search operation leaders decided to comb through the forest and hills around the clearing again, as they had already done at the pass. Again, nothing. Not a piece of clothing, not a shoe, not a toolbox. A logical question arose. Where had Valery Shuvalov gone? If he had felt ill, he could have stayed in the cab. But he was not there. If he had decided to go for help, leaving the radio on, why hadn't he said anything over the radio? Perhaps, according to some versions, he saw something, remembered the strange thing on the ground he mentioned to the dispatcher before disappearing, and went out to check it out. But how could he survive without food and shelter? And why would he return? One local resident familiar with the situation pointed out that sometimes there are legends in the Urals that people see something unusual and follow it. Of course, this is mysticism, but the fact is that the pilot could have left the cockpit voluntarily, as there were no signs of a fight or robbery. However, whether he was taken away by force or not remains an unanswered question. Rescuers eventually officially announced that pilot Valery Shuvalov is missing. There are no traces, and the aircraft was found undamaged. It should be noted that before radio contact was lost, Shuvalov transmitted, "I see something strange on the ground." The dispatcher never received any clarification. It cannot be ruled out that the pilot landed to investigate the object. But why didn't he return? It is unknown what was there. Later, a few enthusiasts went to the clearing to try to find at least a hint of this strange object, but they saw nothing unusual. Only the autumn dampness in a small stream remained. The police eventually called off the large-scale search. The dense Ural forests make it difficult to find a body if a person has gone far on foot. In winter, the tracks would certainly have been covered by snow. The case was thus frozen. The missing pilot, with no signs of foul play, was presumed dead, but under what circumstances remained unclear. Shuvalov's relatives insisted on continuing the search, but this proved too difficult financially and logistically. Various rumors circulated. Some said that the aircraft had arrived on a secret mission and that it was all a setup, but these were wild speculations. Why would a reliable pilot disappear without his documents, and why would the helicopter be abandoned with the radio still on? Few suspected a psychological breakdown. Shuvalov was known for his calm demeanor and loved his job. Crime? Unlikely, as there were no signs of a struggle. Some mentioned the Dyatlov Pass area with its history of anomalous phenomena, but everything remains in the realm of speculation. In May 2002, 44-year-old geologist Ivan Kartashov, an experienced specialist from Yekaterinburg, set off for the Dyatlov Pass area with a specific scientific goal: to collect soil and rock samples for his research. He was no stranger to the area. He had already been on several expeditions to the northern Urals and had visited the infamous pass many times. Ivan did not believe in mysticism or rumors. He was interested only in geology and any rare minerals that he thought might be found in the area. Grabbing his backpack and tools, a hammer, a trowel, and test tubes, he set off in an all-terrain vehicle to the starting point of his route, planning to spend about 2 weeks in the mountains, strictly adhering to his schedule and, if necessary, contacting his colleagues by satellite phone, since there was no other means of communication in those parts. Everything began to seem unusual when, after a week, his regular short reports stopped coming in. Before that, he had been in touch once a day, simply sending his coordinates or saying, "Everything is fine." But then, everything stopped. At first, his friends, colleagues, and like-minded people assumed that it was a technical glitch. There could be communication problems in the mountains, and Ivan did not seem like the type of person who would make a silly mistake. However, when he did not show up at the agreed meeting point, the alarm bells started ringing. A rescue team was quickly assembled. People familiar with the Urals, employees of the Ministry of Emergency Situations, and volunteer tourists. They searched for Ivan using the last coordinates he had sent, which were for a relatively quiet, wooded area at the foot of the ridge. There they found the first campsite. Ivan's tent was standing, with some of his provisions, a camping pot, and a few personal items. But his geological instruments, hammer, sample containers, trowel, were missing. There was no sign of a struggle or disorder. It was as if the man had left the camp in a hurry, leaving some of his equipment behind. The Ministry of Emergency Situations figured he had moved on, maybe for a day or two. They searched the area, shouting and looking, but there was no response. The weather was okay, although it could get cold at night. It wasn't until a few days later, after expanding the search radius, that rescuers noticed an inaccessible rock 2 miles north of the camp. The geologist's documents did not indicate that he was planning to climb any cliffs. He did not take any climbing equipment with him, and he was not a rock climber, being more of a soil scientist and rock expert, as he himself joked. Nevertheless, a helicopter sent out to investigate discovered something strange. On a small peak, quite steeply sloping on 3 sides, the silhouette of a person was visible. Looking closer, the pilots realized that it was someone's motionless body. A rescue team was sent to the site, which had to use special climbing gear because there were no trails or easy way to get up there. When they reached the summit, a horrific scene met their eyes. Ivan Kartashov was sitting there, leaning back against the cold stone wall, his eyes closed, with a small platform of ice and snow beneath him. There was no contortion of agony on his face, nor any expression of fear. He looked as if he were asleep. Geological instruments were scattered around him, a hammer, fragments of test tubes, a trowel. There were no signs of injury. It did not appear that he had fallen from a height. There was no climbing equipment, no ropes, nothing to explain how he could have climbed up there. His clothes were the same as he usually wore on field trips, but not suitable for climbing a sheer wall. A medical examination at the scene revealed no obvious signs of violence or injury, as if his body had simply stopped functioning. The body did not catch fire from frostbite, although it was cool but not deadly, or from stab wounds. Of course, the expert later suggested that it could have been cardiac arrest, but the conclusion remained vague. The cause of death is unclear. No signs of violence were found. The situation itself shocked the rescuers. It took them several hours to climb up firmly secured ropes to get there. And how did Ivan end up there without any visible equipment in the middle of the night, or at dawn? The police tried to find a rational explanation. Some said that maybe he got carried away by his enthusiasm for geology, went after some kind of specimen, and didn't appreciate the difficulty of the route. But the rock is almost vertical, and Kartashov was not an extreme sports enthusiast. People at the scene agreed. To get here, you need at least basic climbing equipment. In addition, the body was found with no injuries, as if he had accidentally teleported there. His tools were scattered strangely, as if he had grabbed them, started doing something, and then dropped them. Ivan's relatives were confused. Everyone who knew him said, "It's unbelievable. Ivan would never have climbed such a scary wall alone without safety equipment, and most importantly, why would he?" Would anyone agree that he was the victim of some kind of crime, but there were no other traces at the top? Or did he encounter something unknown and run away in panic, leaving no logical trail? It's hard to believe. Thus, the case of the death of geologist Ivan Kartashov in May 2002 became one of the anomalous disappearances, deaths in the Dyatlov Pass area. Technically, the area is known for its harsh conditions, but people don't usually disappear in such an inexplicable way. In its final report, the police stated, "Death due to unknown circumstances. The accident theory could not be confirmed." Of course, no one claimed anything paranormal, but the context of another mystery in an area infamous for the events of 1959 inevitably fueled speculation. Some enthusiasts added this case to the so-called Dyatlov analogs. When an experienced person familiar with the area disappears for no apparent reason and is later found in a place where they had no chance of reaching alone, especially at night or at dusk. Theories ranged from instantaneous loss of consciousness and transport by predators, but then why was the body intact, to spontaneous mental breakdown caused by an unknown natural factor. Some hinted that increased radiation or other anomalies had been recorded in the area of the pass. Be that as it may, Ivan's family organized a funeral and his samples and notes, unfortunately, were never analyzed. Only some of his notes were found in his backpack near the camp, with no indication of a plan to climb the rock. Just general plans for soil analysis and mentions of possible mineral locations. Judging by his notes, Ivan wanted to spend another day or two in the area and return by May 20th. Was he looking for something special in the upper Rocky Belts? It remains a mystery. Despite the efforts of rescuers and investigators, it has never been possible to understand what happened to these people. The Dyatlov Pass and the surrounding area remain one of the most mysterious places on the planet, where the line between reality and the unknown becomes too thin. If you liked the video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and share your opinion in the comments. What do you think happened to these people? Perhaps your opinion will shed light on the mysteries of the Dyatlov Pass. Thank you for watching. Take care and remember that nature can be not only beautiful, but also dangerous.